Hello everyone, welcome back. If you just tried me, there was some kind of glitch, and I don't think my recording was recording, but I couldn't check it. It got jammed. Well, I see you're back, so welcome. We're going to read chapter 6 today of The Little Lame Prince and some stories to tell. So in just one moment I will get the musicians to leave their room. They're going on a break, and here we are. The chamber musicians are very wonderful musicians, but they need a break, and so we're going to give them a break. I don't know about you, but we've been cooped up in our houses long enough. It's beginning to feel a little bit like the Little Prince in his tall, solitary tower. And I'm wearing semi-gardening clothes today because my family and some friends came down and they're making a garden. We're going to have a tea garden out in the back. It'll be like a formal English garden. And I'll broadcast from there once we get it set up. But we're just putting dirt in right now. We decided with the things that are going on, I want you kids and parents to think about building some victory gardens like they did during the war, because we may have shortages before the summer's over, even if things get better. So you can grow things, and it's fun to do with your kids, and you can share them with others. I've realized all my life I love stories about secret gardens, and I've wondered why. We have friends in England that have a walled garden, and then they have a walled vegetable garden. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie, The Secret Garden, but it's really wonderful. You might want to look at it and think what you could do in your backyard just for fun in a corner. I'm going to have sort of an English garden. There isn't a wall, there's a fence around my backyard, but I'm going to put, we're going to have a tea area and to sit in and to admire the garden and see the vegetables grow. That's the best entertainment right now I can offer other than TV and this reading. I grew up in Southern California, and as a child, I think I've told you this, but as an older child we would go to San Juan Capistrano. The swallows would come there every year. Well, that's what happened in our story yesterday, and as you remember, there was this cloak that the kindly old woman gave him. He said, "This is a present for you, and if you spread it out and sit on it like a lily pad, it'll float up to the ceiling, and you can open the skylight and go out and fly around and be up with the birds." So yesterday, the Little Lame Prince did that. And Prince Dolor. And so here, I'm going to go back and just read a little bit, because he notices the swallows. We talked about it yesterday. "Then, just to rest his eyes, he turned them up to the sky, the blue, bright, empty sky, which he had looked at so often and seen nothing. Now surely there was something. A long, black, wavy line moving on in the distance. Not by chance, as the clouds would move apparently, but deliberately, as if it were alive. Have you ever seen birds flying in a group? I always wait every year for the Canadian geese to fly south and then come back. They always go in a row. It's really quite wonderful to see, and you hear them honking. He might have seen it before. He almost thought he had. But then he could not tell what it was. Looking at through his spectacles, he discovered that it was really alive, being a long string of birds flying one after the other, their wings moving steadily and their heads pointed in one direction as steadily as if each were a little ship, guided invisibly by an unerring helm. Isn't that amazing how birds flock together and fly? They must be the passage birds flying seaward," cried the boy, who had read a little bit about them and had a great talent for putting two and two together and finding out all he could. "Oh, how I should like to see them quite close, and to know where they come from and whither they are going. How I wish I knew everything in all the world." Don't you all often want to wish you could do that? I do. A silly speech for even an examining little boy to make, because as we grow older, the more we know, the more we find out there is to know. Well, that's being a little grumpy, but that's what the writer says. And Prince Dolor blushed when he had said it and hoped nobody had heard him. Apparently somebody had, however, for the cloak gave a sudden bound forward and and presently he found himself high up in the air, way like it'd be above the ceiling and out the skylight, way up into the sky, probably taller than the church steeple across the street. And presently he found himself right in the very middle of that band of aerial travelers, the birds, who had no magic to travel on, nothing except their wings. Yet there they were, making their fearless way through the sky. You wonder why I have a cap on. I've been outside, and it's kind of cool here. Prince Dolar, we've been working on the garden. Prince Dolar looked at them as one after the other they glided past him, and they looked at him, these pretty swallows with their changing necks and bright eyes, as if wanting to meet in midair such an extraordinary sort of bird. "Oh, I wish I were going with you, you lovely creatures," cried the boy. "I'm getting so tired of this dull, plain, and dreary, lonely tower. I do want to see the world. Pretty swallows, dear swallows, tell me what it looks like, the beautiful, wonderful world." But the swallows flew past him steadily, slowly, pursuing their course as if inside each little head had been a mariner's compass to guide them safe over the land and sea, direct to the place where they had desired to go. The boy looked after them with envy. For a long time he followed with his eyes the faint, wavy black line as it floated away, sometimes changing its curves a little, but never deviating from its settled course, till it vanished entirely out of sight. Then he settles himself down in the center of the club, feeling quite sad and lonely. "I think I'll go home," said he, and repeated his abracadabra tum tum tea with a rather heavy heart. The more he had, the more he wanted. And it is not always that one can have everything one wants, at least at the exact minute one craves for it. Not even though one is a prince and has a powerful and beneficent godmother. He did not like to vex his godmother by calling for her and telling her how unhappy he was, in spite of all of her goodness. So he just kept his trouble to himself and went back to his lonely tower and spent 3 days in silent melancholy, without even attempting another journey on his traveling cloak. The 4th day it happened that the deaf-mute paid his accustomed visit, after which Prince Dolar's spirits rose. They always did when he got the new books, which, just to relieve his conscience, the king of No Man's Land regularly sent to his nephew, with many new toys also, though the latter was disregarded now. "Toys indeed, when I'm a big boy," said the prince with disdain, and would scarcely condescend to mount a rocking horse which had come somehow or other. "I can't be expected to explain things very exactly packed on the back of the other, the great black horse which stood and fed contentedly at the bottom of the tower." Prince Dolar leaned over and looked at it, and thought how grand it must be to get upon its back this grand live steed and ride away like the pictures of knights. "Do you ever dream of being a knight?" "I did. I love stories about knights." "Do you girls know what a knight is? You boys know what a knight is?" In classical books, a knight is somebody who defends the honor or integrity of a king or a prince. And they're soldiers. They're wonderful soldiers that ride horses. "Suppose I was a knight," he said to himself, "then I should be obliged to ride out and see the world." But he kept all these thoughts to himself and just sat still, devouring his new books till he had come to the end of them all. It was a repast not unlike the Barmecides feast, which he read of in the Arabian Nights, which consisted of very elegant but empty dishes, or that supper of Sancho Panza's in Don Quixote, where the minute the smoking dishes came on the table, the physician waved his hand and they were all taken away. Thus almost all ordinary delights of boy life had been taken away from, or rather never given, to this poor little prince. I wondered, he would sometimes think, I wonder what it feels like to be on the back of a horse, galloping away, or holding the reins in a carriage, or tearing across the country, or jumping a ditch, or running a race, such as I've read or I see in pictures. What a lot of things there are that I should like to do, but first I should like to go and see the world. I'll try. Apparently, it was his godmother's plan always to let him try, and try hard, before he gained anything. This day, the knots that tied up his traveling cloak were more than unusually troublesome, and he was a full half hour before he got out into the... Oops, there's some pictures. I'll show you. Picture, there's a revolution going on. I don't know if you can see that. And then over here he is flying on his, cloak, his magic cloak. He found himself floating merrily over the top of the tower. Hitherto in all his journeys he'd never let himself go out of sight of home, for the dreary building, after all, was home. He remembered no other. But now he felt sick of the very look of his tower, with its round, smooth walls and level battlements. Sounds like our homes in a way, after being here inside so much. When I have a drink of tea here, we'll continue. I'm using my mustache cup, as I showed you yesterday. Keeps my mustache clean. As he spoke, the cloak, as if seized suddenly with a new idea, bounded forward and went skimming through the air, faster than the very fastest railway train. Well, now it'd be like a plane. Gee up, cried the Prince Dolor in great excitement. This is as good as riding a race. And he patted the cloak as if it had been a horse, that is, in the way he supposed horses ought to be patted, and tossed his head back to meet the fresh breeze, pulled his coat collar up and his hat down as he felt the wind grow keener and colder than anything he had ever known. What does it matter, though, said he. I'm a boy, and boys ought not to mind anything. Still, for all his goodwill, by and by he began to shiver exceedingly. Also, he had come away without his dinner, and he grew frightfully hungry. And to add to everything, the sunshiny day changed into rain, and being high up in the very midst of the clouds, he got soaked through and through in a few minutes. Shall I turn back, meditated he? Suppose I say abracadabra. Here he stopped, for already the cloak gave an obedient lurch, as if it were expecting to be sent home immediately. No, I can't go back. I must go forward and see the world. But oh, if I had but the shabbiest old rug to shelter me from the rain, or the driest morsel of bread and cheese just to keep me from starving. Still, I don't much mind. I'm a prince, and ought to be able to stand anything. Hold on, cloak, we'll make the best of it. It was the most curious circumstance, but no sooner had he said this than he felt stealing over his knees something warm and soft. In fact, it was a most beautiful bearskin, which folded itself round him quite naturally and cuddled him up as closely as if he had been a cub of the kind old mother bear that once owned it. Then, feeling in his pocket, which suddenly stuck out in a marvelous way, he found not exactly bread and cheese, nor even sandwiches, but a packet of the most delicious food he had ever tasted. It was not meat nor pudding, but a combination of both. And it served him excellently for both. He ate his dinner with the greatest gusto imaginable, till he grew so thirsty he did not know what to do. Couldn't I just have one drop of water if it didn't trouble you too much, kindest of godmothers? For he really thought this want was beyond her power to supply. All the water which supplied Hopeless Tower was pumped up with difficulty from a deep artesian well. There were no such things known in No Man's Land which had been made at the foot of it. But around for miles upon miles the desolate plain was perfectly dry, and above it, high in the air, how could he expect to find a well or to get even a drop of water? He forgot one thing. Guess what he forgot? The rain. While he spoke, it came on in another wild burst, as if the clouds had poured themselves out in a passion of crying, wetting him certainly, but leaving behind in a large glass vessel, which he had never noticed before, enough water to quench the thirst of 2 or 3 boys at least. And it was so fresh, so pure, as water from the clouds always is when it does not catch the soot from city chimneys or other defilements, that he drank it every drop with the greatest delight and content. Also, as soon as it was empty, the rain filled it again, so that he was able to wash his face and hands and refresh himself exceedingly. Then the sun came out and dried him in no time at all. After that, he curled himself up under the I woke up at 5 this morning. Up under the bearskin rug, though he determined to be the most wide-awake boy imaginable, being so exceedingly snug and warm and comfortable, Prince Dolar condescended to shut his eyes just for 1 minute. The next minute, he was sound asleep. When he awoke, he found himself floating over a country quite unlike anything he had ever seen before. Yet it was nothing but what most of you children see every day and never notice it. A pretty country landscape like England or Scotland or France, or like right outside here, or any other land you choose to name. It had no particular features, nothing in it grand or lovely. It was simply pretty, nothing more. Yet to Prince Dolar, who had never gone beyond his lonely tower and level plain, it appeared the most charming sight imaginable. First, there was a river. It came tumbling down the hillside, frothing and foaming, playing at hide-and-seek among the rocks, then bursting out in noisy fun like a child to bury itself in deep, still pools. Afterward, it went steadily on for a while like a good grown-up person, till it came to another big rock where it misbehaved itself extremely. It turned into a cataract and went tumbling over and over after a fashion that made the prince, who had never seen water before, except in his bath or his drinking cup, clap his hands with delight. That was really fun. It is so active, so alive. I like things active and alive, cried he, and watched it shimmering and dancing and whirling and leaping, till after a few windings and vagaries it settled into a respectable stream. After that it went along, deep, quiet, but flowing steadily on till it reached a large lake into which it slipped, and so ended its course. All this the boy saw either with his own naked eye or through his gold spectacles. He saw also in a picture beautiful but silent many other things which struck him with wonder, especially a grove of trees. Only think to have lived to his age, which he himself did not know, as he did not know his own birthday, and never to have seen trees. As he floated over these oaks, they seemed to him, trunk, branches, and leaves, the most curious sight imaginable. If I could only get nearer so as to touch them, said he, and immediately the obedient cloak ducked down. Prince Dolar made to snatch the topmost twig of the tallest tree and caught a bunch of leaves in his hand. Just a bunch of green leaves, such as we see in myriads, watching them bud, grow, fall, and then kicking them along the ground as if they were worth nothing. Yet how wonderful they are, every one of them a little different. I don't suppose you could ever find 2 leaves exactly alike in form, color, or size. No matter, then you can find 2 faces alike or 2 characters exactly the same. You know, that's really true. The veins and leaves, every one is unique. Every leaf is unique, and so are people. The plan of this world is infinite similarity, yet infinite variety. That's a really important thing. There are many similarities, but there's a myriad of variety and possibilities. We're alike and not alike. That's what makes our world so interesting and wonderful and rich. Prince Dolar examined his leaves with the greatest curiosity, and also a little caterpillar that he found walking over one of them. He coaxed it to take an additional walk over his finger, which it did with the greatest dignity and decorum, as if it, Mr. Caterpillar, was the most important individual in existence. It amused him for a long time, and when a sudden gust of wind blew it overboard, leaves and all, he felt quite disconsolate. Excuse me. Still, there must be many live creatures in the world besides caterpillars. I should like to see a few of them. The cloak gave a little dip down as if to say, "All right, my prince," and bore him across the oak forest to a long, fertile valley called in Scotland a strait, and in England a weald. But what they call it in the tongue of no man's land, I don't know. It was made up of cornfields, pasture fields, lanes, hedges, brooks, and ponds. Also in it were what the prince desired to see, a quantity of living creatures, wild and tame. Cows and horses, lambs and sheep, fed in the meadows, pigs and fowls walked about the farmyards. And in lonelier places, hares scudded, rabbits burrowed, pheasants and partridges, with many other smaller birds, inhabited the fields and the woods. What a wonderful place that must be. Sounds beautiful. Through his wonderful spectacles, the prince could see everything, but as I said, it was a silent picture. He was too high up to catch anything except a faint murmur, which only aroused his anxiety even more. I have as good as a pair of two eyes, he thought. I wonder if my godmother would give me a second pair of eyes. So he wants 4 eyes. I guess 2 in the back of his head, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out here. It's a good day for tea. I'm having Earl Grey. Twinings. Scarcely had he spoken than he found lying on his lap the most curious little parcel, all done. All done up in silvery paper. And it contained, what do you think? Actually a pair of silver ears, which when he tried them on fitted so exactly over his own that he hardly felt them, except for the difference they made in his hearing. There is something which we listen to daily and never notice. I mean the sounds of the visible world, animate and inanimate. Winds blowing, waters flowing, trees stirring, insects whirring. Dear me. I'm quite unconsciously writing a rhyme with the various cries of the birds and beasts, lowing cattle, bleating sheep, grunting pigs, cackling hens. All the infinite discords that somehow or other make a beautiful harmony. You know, we can hear those things a bit more now. I hear birds a lot more because there's less noise in the sky. We hear this and are so accustomed to it that we think nothing of it. But Prince Dolor, who had lived all his days in the dead silence of the hopeless tower, heard it for the first time. And oh, if you could have seen his face. He listened and listened as if he could never have done listening. And he looked and looked as if he could not gaze enough. Above all, the motion of the animals delighted him. Cows walking, horses galloping, little lambs and calves running races across the meadows was such a treat for him to watch. That was always so quiet. But these creatures having 4 legs and only 2, the difference did not strike him painfully. Still, by and by, after the fashion of children, and I fear of many big people too, he began to want something more than he had, something that would be fresh and new. We always want something new and fresh. It's part of human nature, and we're very privileged in the United States, so we can pursue some of those things. Godmother, he said, having now begun to believe that, whether he saw her or not, he could always speak to her with full confidence as she would hear him. Godmother, all these creatures I like exceedingly, but I should like better to see a creature like myself. Couldn't you show me just one little boy? There was a sigh behind him. It might have been only the wind, and the cloak remained so long balanced, motionless in the air, that he was half afraid his godmother had forgotten him. or was offended for him for asking too much. Suddenly a shrill whistle startled him, and even through his silver ears, and looking downward he saw start up from behind a bush on a common something. Neither sheep nor a horse nor a cow, nothing upon four legs. This creature only had two, but they were long, straight, and strong, and it had a lithe, active body and a curly head of black hair upon its shoulders. It was a boy, a shepherd boy, about the prince's own age, but oh, so different. Not that he was an ugly boy, though his face was almost as red as his hands, and his shaggy hair matted like the backs of his own sheep. He was a rather nice-looking lad, and seemed so bright and healthy and good-tempered. Jolly would maybe be the word, but I'm not sure if they have such a one in the elegant language of no man's land. That the little prince watched him with great admiration. Might he come down and play with me? I would drop him to the ground, to him, or fetch him up to me here. Oh, how nice it would be if I only had a little boy to play with me. But the cloak, usually so obedient to wishes, disobeyed him now. There were evidently some things which his godmother either could not or would not give. The cloak hung stationary, high in the air, never attempting to descend. The shepherd lad evidently took it for a large bird, and shading his eyes looked up at it, making the prince's heart beat fast. However, nothing ensued. The boy turned around with a long, loud whistle, seemingly his usual or only way of expressing his feelings. He couldn't talk, so he would blow a whistle. He could not make the thing out exactly. It was a rather mysterious affair, but it did not trouble him much, because he was not an examining boy. Then, stretching out himself, for he had been evidently half asleep, he began flopping his shoulders with his arms to wake and warm himself, while his dog, a rough collie who had been guarding the sheep, meanwhile, began to jump upon him, barking with delight. Down, Snap, down. Stop that. There was evidently some things which his grandmother either could not or would not give. The cloak hung stationary, as I just read, high in the air, never attempting to descend. The shepherd lad evidently took it for a large bird, and shading his eyes looked up at it, making the prince's heart beat fast. However, nothing ensued. The boy turned around with a long, loud whistle, seeming his usual and only way of expressing his feelings. He could not make the thing out exactly. It was a rather mysterious affair, but it did not trouble him much. He was not an examining boy. Then, stretching himself, for he had been evidently half asleep, he began flopping his shoulders with his arms to wake and warm himself. Like that, like you do when you wake up. Oh, I'm going to wake up. Let's get going. While his dog, a rough collie who had been guarding the sheep, meanwhile, began to jump upon him, barking with delight. Down, Snap, down. Stop that, or I'll thrash you, said the prince. Heard him say, though with such a rough, hard voice and queer pronunciation that it was difficult to make the words out. Hello, let's warm ourselves by a race. They started off together, boy and dog, barking and shouting till it was doubtful which made the most noise around the fastest. A regular steeplechase it was, first across the level common, greatly disturbing the quiet sheep, and then tearing away across country, scrambling through hedges, and leaping ditches and tumbling up and down over plowed fields. It did not seem to have anything to run for, but as they did it, both of them, for the mere pleasure of motion. and what a pleasure that seemed. To the dog, of course, but scarcely less to the boy. How he skimmed all over the ground, his cheeks glowing and his hair flying in his legs. Oh, what a pair of legs he had. Must have been a runner, huh? Prince Stolar was watching him with great intentness, in a state of excitement almost equal to that of the runner himself for a while. Then the sweet pale face grew a trifle paler, the lips began to quiver and the eyes to fill. How nice it must be to run like that, he said softly, thinking that never in this world would he be able to do the same. Now he understood what his godmother had meant when she gave him his traveling cloak, and why he had heard that sigh. He was sure it was hers when he asked to see just one little boy. I think I'd rather not look at him again. And the poor little prince, drawing himself back into the center of the cloak, resuming his favorite posture, sitting like a Turk with his arms wrapped around his feeble, useless legs. "You're no good to me," he said, patting his legs mournfully. "You will never be any good to me. I wonder why I had you at all. I wonder why I was born at all, since I was not to grow up like other little boys." "Why not?" A question so strange, so sad, yet so often occurring in some form or other in this world, as you will find, my children, when you are older, that even if he had put it to his mother, she could only have answered it as we have to answer many difficult things, by simply saying, "I don't know." That's an important thing, to be able to admit you don't know. There's much we do not know and cannot understand. We big folks know more than you little ones. We have to accept it all, just as you have to accept anything which your parents may tell you, even though you don't as yet see the reason for it. You may sometime, if you do exactly as they will tell you, and you are content to wait. Prince Stolar sat with a good while thus, Prince Stolar sat at a good while thus, or it appeared to him a good while. So many thoughts came and went through this poor young mind, thoughts of great bitterness, which little though he was, seemed to make him grow years older in a few minutes. Then he fancied the cloak would begin to rock gently to and fro with a soothing kind of motion, as if he were in somebody's arms. Somebody who did not speak but loved him and comforted him without the need of words. Comfort him without the need of words, not by deceiving him with false encouragement or hope, but by making him see the plain, hard truth in all its hardness, that letting him quietly face it till it grew softened down and did not seem nearly so dreadful after all. Through the dreary silence and blackness, for he had placed himself so that he could see nothing but the sky, he had taken off his silver ears as well as his gold spectacles, which was the use of either, when he had no legs in which to walk or run. But from below there rose a delicious sound. You have heard it many, hundreds of times, my children, and so have I. When I was a child, I thought there was nothing so sweet, I think so still. It's just the song of the skylark mounting higher and higher from the ground till it came so close, and Stolar could distinguish his quivering wings and tiny body, almost too tiny to contain such a gush of music. "Oh, you beautiful, beautiful bird," cried he. "I should dearly like to take you in and cuddle you, that is, if I could, if I dared." But he hesitated. The little brown creature with his loud heavenly voice almost made him afraid. Nevertheless, it made him happy, and he watched and listened, so absorbed that he forgot all regret and pain, forgot everything in the world except the little lark. It soared, and he was just wondering if it would soar out of sight, and what in the world he should do when it is gone, and when it suddenly closes its wings, or as larks do. They mean to drop to the ground. But instead of dropping to the ground, it dropped right into the little boy's chest. What felicity, if only it would stay, a tiny soft thing to fondle and kiss, to sing to him all day long. and be his playfellow and companion, tame and tender, while to the rest of the world it was a wild bird in the air. What a pride, what a delight to have something that nobody else had, something all his own. As the traveling cloak traveled on, he little heeded where, and the lark stayed still and nestled down in his bosom, hopped from his hand to his shoulder, and kissed him with its dainty beak as it loved him. Prince Dolor forgot all his grief and was entirely happy. But when he got inside of the hopeless tower, a painful thought struck him. My pretty bird, what am I to do with you now? If I take you into my room and shut you up there, you, a wild skylark of the air, what will become of you? I'm used to this, but you are not. You will be so miserable, and I suppose my nurse shall find you and can't bear the sound of singing. Besides, I remember her once telling me that the nicest thing she ever ate in her life was lark pie. Oh dear. The little boy shivered all over at the thought, and though the merry lark immediately broke into the loudest carol, as if saying derisively that he defied anybody to eat him, still Prince Dolor was very uneasy. In another minute he made up his mind. No, my bird, nothing so dreadful shall happen to you if I can help it. I would rather do without you altogether. Yes, I'll try. Fly away, my darling, my beautiful. Goodbye, my merry, merry bird. Opening his two caressing hands in which he, as if for protection, he had folded it, he let the lark go. It lingered a minute, perching on the brim of the cloak and looking at him with eyes almost human tenderness. Then away it flew far up into the blue sky. It was only a bird. But sometime thereafter, when Prince Dolor had eaten his supper somewhat drearily, I would say, except for the thought he could not possibly sup off lark pie now, gone quietly to bed, the only familiar little bed where he descended his accustomed sleep or lies wayward, contentedly thinking, suddenly he heard outside the window a little faint carol. Faint, but cheerful, even though it was in the middle of the night. The dear little lark, he had not flown away after all. It was truly the most extraordinary bird, unlike ordinary larks. He kept hovering about the tower in silence and darkness in the night, outside the windows. Darkness of the night, outside the window or over the roof. Whenever he listened for a moment, he heard it singing still. He went to sleep, as happy as a king. Well, here ends the story for today. He really liked being with this lark, and she sat outside his tower and sang to him. And thank goodness the nurse didn't find the lark and make lark pie out of the bird. Thank you, Punky, for waking up. Punky's glad to have you all here. I'm going to tell you a story about a bird. I don't know if I told you about Petey. We had a pet quail, and Petey was a little bird, smaller than a lark. And we were out visiting a neighbor in our front yard, and we had a boxwood hedge, which is unusual for Southern California. We heard this beep, 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 beep. So my mother, who just loved birds and had an aviary, kept hearing the peep, and after our neighbor left, she looked in the hedge, and California quail have what they call a cubby. They have a group of babies that follow the mother around. And if one of the babies is weak, she leaves the baby behind. And this was the runt of the bird. No, they don't call it a litter, of the new baby birds. And they were just old enough to walk, and they were walking and in a line, like the larks fly in a line, so that quails walk. So we couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. We finally found it. So my mother knew a lady who raised parakeets and canaries, and we had about 50 of them in an aviary outside. Southern California was warm. And she said, well, you can if you want to rescue the bird, give the bird what we used to be called Similac. It's a powdered milk for babies. It's like formula a little bit, but you have to add water to it. And hard-boiled eggs mashed up, and put it on your finger and let the bird beak, peck it off your finger. We did that, and Petey got older. My dad, who raised chickens, and we had peahens, chickens, peacocks, everything. My dad said, well, we've got to let this bird go. It's a wild bird. I think I've told you this story before, but it's worth repeating, like the lark. We let Petey out. I was crying because I knew Petey would never come back ever again. She was going to fly away. Well, my dad let go of Petey like this to let her fly, and she went soaring way up into the sky, very much like the Little Lame Prince on his cloak, and made a big circle, and then came back and landed on my dad's shoulder. So every day I got to take Petey out. She would fly in a big circle and come back and land on my shoulder. And Petey lived for quite a long time. She lived in a chicken pen, like the chickens, and she was fine, but she finally died, but she was pretty old for a wild bird. And that was my favorite pet. Well, you know, I've always loved stories of the secret garden. I don't know, and I said at the beginning, I don't know if you watched it. The thing about secret gardens is there are walls, and there's secrets behind the walls. And there's privacy, which all of us wanted a lot more than we do now. Even if we're introverts, the fact is we can't go see somebody is really frustrating. So, I was thinking that I was listening to Mahler's Fifth Symphony, a really interesting symphony. It was being performed by the Berlin Philharmonic, and I happened to look up some quotes by Mahler, and he said this is a confusing symphony to a lot of people, but he said there are things that a child knows as a baby that are frightening, and he tried to kind of capture that in the music. Well, I just thought how my life when I was abandoned in the crib was like a prison, and I had built a wall, like a retaining wall, to protect me from being hurt. And it's taken all of my life to know that and to figure it out, and I'm very thankful that now that I have friends, I can be healthy again. But it's like the Little Lame Prince in the prison, and I'm sure that all of you are feeling like you're in a round tower in Ireland somewhere in your house. So I'd really advise you to go out. I saw a neighbor, and she's wearing a mask. I was wearing a mask. She said, well, I see you out in the yard. We're always walking our dogs. I said, well, come on over and talk to me. It's okay. We can talk in the yard. Our yard's big enough that we can talk 12 feet apart and not miss each other. So I just would encourage you, again, to reach out to anyone that you know and feed a little bird. And as Portlandia, the very funny program says, put a bird on it. I hope you have a good day, and see you tonight at 7 for another chapter of The Horse and His Boy. Thank you so much for coming by, and I hope you have a safe trip home. And this is the end, and I will see you tonight at 7, and tomorrow at 4 we'll read another portion of the story. Have a wonderful evening. God bless.